Today on Straight Talk Africa, on this day following the 241st anniversary of American independence, we look at the historical role the African diaspora has played and continues to play in the United States and around the world. That's coming up next right here on Straight Talk Africa. Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa, live from the Voice of America studios here in Washington. I am Shaka Sali.
Hello, Shaka, and hello to all our viewers and listeners on the continent and elsewhere. I'm Ian Bior, your social media reporter.
Today, we'll have a discussion on the role of the African diaspora in the United States and beyond.
And coming up later, our viewers and listeners have weighed in on our topic through emails, Facebook, and Twitter comments, and we'll reveal some of them ahead on Straight Talk Africa.
Many studies indicate that both African Americans and the recent indigenous African immigrants have greatly influenced the social, economic, and political culture in America and globally. My colleague, Paul Cisco, has more.
For decades, the African diaspora has enriched the social, economic, and cultural environment of cities and communities across the United States and around the world. African immigration to the United States has roughly doubled in every decade since 1970. Most come from the more populated African nations of Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Egypt, followed by South Africa, Ghana, and Kenya. According to the last U.S. Census, there were 3.3 million members of the sub-Saharan African diaspora living in the United States in 2015. Those numbers are steadily growing. A great many refugees find a welcoming home in America, eventually earning enough money to help their less fortunate relatives back home. On a single day in the Washington, D.C. area, I encountered Africans from Ethiopia, Congo, Uganda, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, South Sudan, and more. They're part of an immigrant population enriching our diverse society in countless ways. The metropolitan areas of Washington, New York, Los Angeles, and Atlanta, Georgia attract the greatest numbers of African immigrants. Most are skilled professionals reuniting with relatives, but many new arrivals to the United States are refugees from conflict-torn countries. 41% of America's African-born residents have at least one college degree, making them, as a group, among the best educated immigrant populations in the United States. Historically, Marcus Garvey, George Padmore, W.E.B. Du Bois are among the founding giants contributing to the liberation of blacks. Marcus Garvey was a determined activist in support of Pan-Africanism. In the late 19th century, he advocated for the creation of a common state in Africa, welcoming back all African Americans. W.E.B. Du Bois claimed full rights for Africans on the continent and in African communities worldwide. African self-determination, along with the activism of George Padmore and others, fueled the struggle for independence from colonialism, as well as the unification of African diasporas with the people of Africa. Thousands more have followed in the footsteps of Garvey, Du Bois, and Padmore, those of Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere, furthering the pursuits of freedom, equality, and justice for all. Today, many political observers say that activism and Pan-Africanism have become more of a philosophy than a movement, and that Africans and the diaspora need to reevaluate their Pan-Africanism roots. Paul Cisco, VOA News, Washington.
Thanks, Paul, for that interesting report. Joining us here in our Washington studios are two distinguished guests. Aditola Kayode, a Nigerian broadcast journalist in Lagos with Lagos Television, and she was also a Hubert Humphrey Fellow 2016-2017 at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism, Arizona State University, and Charles Nana, a management consultant based in the southern U.S. state of Alabama. Well, Aditola and Charles, I have to say frankly that I am profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host the two of you for the first time on Straight Talk Africa.
Thanks for having us. It's an honor, too, to have you interview us, too. Ayo.
You're most welcome, Mom.
Thank you.
I am extremely honored and pleased to be on your show. Hopefully we'll have an interesting discussion.
You're most welcome.
Thank you.
Later in the program, we'll give you, the audience, a chance to call and talk with our guests. The number to call is 202-619-3111. US country code is 1. Let me come to you immediately, Aditola. How has it been like being part of the African diaspora in America, at least for the last one academic year?
Yes, the last academic year has been great. It opened up opportunities to see how the business community in America operate, the professional community. I'm a journalist and have been to a couple of TV stations, radio stations, newspaper, and I see how they work, and of course I've been picking bits and pieces from it, and it's been great.
How was the Hubert Humphrey Fellowship? How significant was it really? How important was it for you?
Well, like I say, it's one of my dreams to have a professional experience, an academic experience in an international world. And Hubert Humphrey provided that platform for me too, on one single platform, the professional and academic. I went to Arizona State University and I was blown away with the process, how the faculty, how the lecture, the equipment they have. They have standard studios, everything just like every other news organization, every other broadcast organization, professional. They're also professional and they do all of these things. And also for the professional, I was at WSA 9 in Washington, D.C. for my professional affiliation. I was at Fox in Phoenix, Arizona. I was at Dallas, WFAA, ABC studio in Dallas. And it was a great experience for me, I must say.
Were you, along the way, were you actually told that you happened to be a recipient of a great former U.S. Vice President who a lot of people, in fact, would say he probably was the president that America never had?
Yes, I read about him and everywhere because the fellowship itself is named after him, and we got to learn a lot about him, what he stood for, watched documentaries on him, read about every policy that he made, and his quest to have a great America and also be inclusive.
Charles, what about you? You've been here for quite some time.
I've been here for quite some time, yes. It's sometimes difficult to say, but I've been here for over 30 years.
And how has it been like?
It's been wonderful. It's been wonderful. Every day I'm very appreciative of what our host country, the United States, has offered some of us. The opportunity to go to one of the best schools, the opportunity to work with one of the best companies or some of the best companies in the world. Now as a management consultant, the opportunity to redress or fix companies that are sick. But unfortunately, as your report said earlier, we have about 3.3 million Africans, intellectuals in the United States. None has run for statewide office. We contribute significantly to the economic, political, and social development of the United States, but we do not have a voice on the table. And that is why I decided to run for United States Senate in our great state of Alabama to make sure that the issues that are important to us are discussed, we have a voice, and we're being heard. We go to some of the top schools with everybody else. We sometimes do better, but we stay in the background. What are we afraid of?
But you happen to be, from what I see, frankly, one of the top professionals in your area.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Again, as I mentioned before, I have a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, a master's in biomedical engineering, and an MBA from the University of Chicago. As you know, it's #1 business school, not only in the nation, but it's in the world. Then when I left there, I joined General Electric through their leadership program, where they go out and look for individuals that have strong leadership potentials, and they rotate them through different businesses.
So when you talk about General Electric, it reminds me a bit about my history, because I did my undergraduate at the State University of New York. Guess where? In Albany, upstate New York.
Oh my goodness,
General
yes.
Electric is around the corner, isn't it?
Yes, we have a research center in Schenectady, New York.
Correct.
Actually, I worked at GE Silicones in Waterford, New York, which is just an outside, it's just a suburb of Albany, New York. But the point is, we are among, there was a report that came out about a year ago that showed that African-born immigrants are one of the highest educated in the United States. But if you look at the political structure of the United States, you see Asian Americans, Latino Americans, Muslim Americans, but you don't see a first-generation African or even a second-generation African. Why are we running away from leadership?
And what do you think is the answer, my friend? Is it about lack of organization, lack of a sense of purpose, community? Are we simply, do we simply happen to be individuals, really?
Two things. We inherited that as a group. We have, African culture doesn't give us that strength to learn how to work collectively as a group. Because you can look across what we do in the US. You rarely find someone from Uganda and someone from Cameroon come together and form a business. Even within, let's take Nigeria. Can you find someone from the north, an Hausa and an Igbo, come together and put something together? No way, that will never happen. We don't trust each other. If there's lack of trust, we cannot come together and form bigger things with economy of scale. Number two, we just haven't put together a structure where we look at ourselves as a critical force in the United States. We 3 million strong, we should have a voice. We should be on the table in decision making. But there is no African sitting on any of the top leadership positions in the United States. So the issues that are important to us can never be discussed. And guess what? If we are not on that table, you know who will be making those decisions for us? Donald Trump.
Now,
and if he makes those decisions, I don't think you or I or our children who like the decisions that Donald Trump will be making.
No.
So we need to get involved.
Now, given the education that you say we have had access to, and given the kind of unique exposure, really, as Africans that we have had in the diaspora, how come, then, we keep reflecting the dynamics back home?
Well, it's a recurring challenge. It's not only an African issue. It's called first generational challenges. People who are first generation. For example, I'm first generation Cameroonian in the United States. I bleed for Cameroon. I bleed for Africa. I have an emotional connection to Africa. I want things to go right and well in Cameroon, although they are going in the opposite way. On the other hand, as a first generation, you recognize and appreciate the opportunities offered to you by your host nation, by your host country, and you feel morally obligated to contribute, to be part of it. But more importantly, and where I think the challenge is, and this is where the African continent is losing, because 1 out of every 3 Africans with a tertiary degree lives out of Africa. How about our children, or the children of those 1/3? They will grow in foreign lands and might have no relationship to Africa. And that is why the issue of dual nationality, dual citizenship is a big deal. But 1/3 of African nations don't even want to hear it, especially French Africa.
We'll come back to that later, but you keep referring to yourself as a first-generation African. What about people like, for example, the founding president of Nigeria, Dr. Azikiwe, Nnamdi Azikiwe? What about people like the founding president of Ghana, the Osajefo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah? We're talking about these guys who came here before the Second World War. And guess what they did? They went back home and contributed to liberating their countries from colonialism.
Oh, absolutely. There's a clear difference between the two. So when I say first generation, this is a generation that came to the United States or went overseas, came to Europe and said they want to stay. They started taking citizenship of the country, of their host country. That's different from the Kwame Nkrumah, the Azikiwe's era. They were very Pan-Africanist, and when they finish their studies, every day they will tell you, I am going back to develop my home country. But unfortunately, when it came to our own era, The leadership has, you know, we have a severe leadership crisis in Africa, a severe leadership problem in Africa. They have created the environment in an African nation so unpalatable that those of us in the diaspora are referred to as activists. They're not activists. They see other ways. They see better ways of doing things. And they bleed and say, how can I help my home nation so that we can do things just a little bit better? Just a little bit better. And unfortunately, most African countries, again, I go back, particularly the French African countries, they look at their children in the diaspora as a threat. We shouldn't be a threat. We should be partners with those living in Africa, that we can bring our technical know-how to help them develop the African continent.
We'll come to a little bit more about that later, but right now, time is not our best ally. Now, we'll pause for a short break. We want to remind you that Straight Talk Africa is now streaming on Facebook. Just enter the keyword Straight Talk Africa and watch our show live, and don't forget to share it with your friends. Also, we are on Twitter and we are tweeting live. Follow us at VOA Shaka. That's VOA Shaka, and join in on today's discussion with your questions and comments. Don't forget to use the hashtag. We'll put some of your tweets on later in the show, and we'll be right back with you, so please don't go away.
We are able to touch on things that are important to people on an everyday basis. We hope that our viewers are getting inspired when they watch our show. They're getting a view of the world from a different perspective, things that perhaps are not in their immediate vicinity. Today, I could put in on the show something that is a little different, a little unique, and this gives me that, inspiration to come to work.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. What is your opinion about today's topic? Call us at 202-619-3111. U.S. country code 1. When you call, remember the following. Ask only one question, keep your comment brief, and turn down the volume on your radio or television. Now let's return to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther. Give you your words. And of course, this is Straight Talk Africa coming to you live from Washington. Let me come to you, Ditola. It's not that we forgot about you. We know that, of course, you are right here with us. What about when you go back to the land of the Oga Pata Pata? I'm talking about, for example, downtown Lagos and what have you. What is the feeling there? What do they think about their brothers and sisters who live in America? Do they call them, for example, prodigal sons or prodigal daughters, or do they place some kind of value on these particular individuals? And if so, why?
Well, when it comes to politics, it's a different ballgame entirely, because it's the way we practice politics is way different from here. And when they come like that from abroad to come contest elections, a set of people see them, like he said earlier on, as a threat. But there are some other people think they also do not know the terrain, and they see them as coming to lord themselves on them. Mm-hmm. But then we need to synergize. We need to work together, because either you like it or not, the fact that they are not living in that country does not say that they are not citizens of that country. Mm-hmm. They are still citizens of Nigeria, correct. And they have this burning desire to, of course, contribute their own quota to the development of the country back home. So they're neither here or there. Here, there's so much concentration on the professionalism, in education, in engineering, in music, in entertainment, movies. You have Africans there making waves, Nigerians making waves in America, and also back in Nigeria too. So they also want to contribute. But how do they do this? For example, right now, you can't vote outside the country.
Correct, you can't.
You can't.
You can't, of course, yeah.
You can't vote.
But at least you can run for office if you have dual nationality, that yes. of the Nigeria and any other country. That's correct?
Correct, you can. Yes. You can, because you have dual, you also have the same rights like other people. Mm-hmm. But here in the U.S.
And can you be, for example, can you be appointed an ambassador for the Republic of Nigeria?
Yeah, I think so. There are a couple of people who have been invited to be ambassadors, be ministers,
You
be
can
commissioners.
I have seen
yes.
some be ministers, actually.
Yes.
So basically what it is, frankly, is that when you are an American Nigerian, you still are treated as a legitimate Nigerian, not as a second-class Nigerian, as I see in some African countries which claim to grant dual nationality.
You're still considered a Nigerian, but you know, politics, there are some underground games and all of that. You may not, as somebody who lives outside the country, you may not know what I's to dot, the T's to cross, you know. And at the end of the day, some of them end up going back the same way without achieving what they want to achieve. And I think that's why we have them venture into some other things. For example, I have covered doctors from America who provide services, free health screening services to Nigerians in Lagos, in other parts of the country. That's the other way. We have people who donate to schools. You know, they're also putting their pies in other things aside from politics. But maybe someday soon we'll get there.
What about Nollywood?
Well, Nollywood, I think it's competing with Hollywood right now. We're doing great in that aspect. A lot of Nigerian movies watched almost everywhere in the world. The music everywhere in the world. You walk through the streets of London, you hear Fela Kuti, you hear Davido, you hear Wizkid, Tiwa Savage, and all of that. And even in America here.
King Sunny Ade.
King Sunny Ade. I went to the museum in Phoenix, Arizona, and there is a part of that museum set aside for King Sunny Ade. I was so proud to be in Nigeria when I saw that.
At the time, someone might ask, why is it that Nollywood tends to focus largely in terms of plot around juju or some kind of juju? Why?
That was years back. That was years back. If you watch the recent ones, there are a lot of fantastic movies coming out of Nigeria right now. We have A+ movie producers who bring out plots that are away from juju. Proponent was like 10, 15 years back. You may not see maybe a tiny little bit of them, but not prominent these days.
What is it that the African diaspora is not doing, especially the diaspora that is from the United States? What is it that you would like them to do that they are not doing right now?
Well, one of the problems, one of the issues is when you categorize African Americans, there are black African Americans, there are African Americans.
They are both from African descent.
But hardly would you see a structured Nigerian American, Cameroonian American, and all of that. But for other parts of the world, you see, you know, I think it's time to come together. There's no crime in concentrating on education, getting educated, inventing. There's so many Africans, Nigerians in investment and, you know, venturing. But it's a large population. As you know, Nigeria is the most populous black nation in the world. And everywhere you go in the world, you find a community of Nigerians. We need to come together.
How many Nigerians are in fact?
I think over 180 for now, but people are still saying that that's what they say. And I always put still counting, you know.
I have seen, in fact, studies suggest that by 2050, Nigeria will be the third most populous nation on this planet Earth. After China and India. They will have surpassed the United States.
Yes, it's true, and we are also making impact in all of these countries. So many people see Nigerians as threats, and because the Nigerian wants to be known, wants to be hardworking, is hardworking, wants to make his own quota, make life meaningful for himself, his family, and probably his community. So that's the point we need to get to right now in the US, in any other part. For example, in the UK, some Nigerian, British Nigerian Nigerians got elected, though some of them were born in Britain,
Right.
but they are of Nigerian descent. We need to move forward.
They have done very well there.
And we need to come to last election in US, so we have like 4 or 5 Nigerians who ran for election. Even here in Maryland, I think there's April Ademiluyi, there's George, there's Rashid Dosmuo. So in other parts of the country, but we still need the support. We have the crowd, we have the population from all African. So don't concentrate only on Nigerians in your community. Let Africans come together. Let them come together from. There's like 2 associations right now for politics. Come together. Let's raise it. We've got the population, and we can do well for the country. Though it's a country of resident or adopted country, we can also have a voice.
Charis, the dream remains, of course, that at some point Africa has to unite. You had the founding fathers led by perhaps the Ghanaian President Kwame Nkrumah, who even wrote a book, a classic actually, Africa Must Unite. He was backed by Algerian Beni Bera. He was, among others, of course, Egyptian President then, Kano Gamal Abdel Nasser and Sekou Toure, Mwalimu Nyerere, and what have you, Kenneth Kaunda, and you name it. Is it possible that perhaps the reason Africans in the diaspora are not as united as you'd like them to be, perhaps is because up to now, Africa retains the inherited colonial boundaries. And that's not just about boundaries in terms of territory and what have you, but probably even in their minds, in their mental capacity, they remain divided, really.
Absolutely. I think you could not have said it any better. One of the biggest challenge that we have in African diaspora and even back home is this colonization mindset. So the challenge for the diaspora and young generation of Africans is how do we take some of these activities that were done by the colonial masters and decolonize them such that it becomes strength for us. Let's take, for example, you have the country of Cameroon. Let me take a step back. If you ask a Cameroonian, an average Cameroonian, the history of Cameroon before 1922, he will not tell you. But he can tell you the history of the English and the French all the way back to the 14th century.
Why not during the times when Cameroon was under the Germans?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Because Cameroon was a German protectorate in 1884. And then in 1916, March 4th, 1916, after the World War I, Cameroon became arbitrarily divided, split up. It was a spoil of war. And the Germans renounced all their properties that they had. And they had 4 properties in Africa. You had Togo, you had Cameroon, you had Namibia, and then you had the East German. You have German East Africa. But let's stick with Cameroon. During that period, Cameroon got divided into 6 different groups. I call them children. So part of the German Cameroon went to Congo. Part of it went to Gabon. Part of it went to Central African Republic. Part of it went to Nigeria. Now, 2 of those 6 children decided to come together. La République du Cameroun, which was a French side, the French Cameroon.
But in fact, it was not really divided among those countries. It was divided among the European powers that controlled that territory.
Correct. That's
so
what I'm saying. Yes.
France,
I said current day.
You're talking about Britain.
Yes. So it was divided. That's why I said they were divided.
Talking about Belgium.
Yes. They were divided arbitrarily among those. But what happened is the 2 sons who decided to come together, the English-speaking part of Cameroon and the French-speaking part of Cameroon, decided to come together. But unfortunately, and they came together under one premise, that will form a federation, will form a federal state.
I thought the English part initially was given an option, either to be part of what is now Nigeria, and to be part of Cameroon, which obviously was Francophone.
That was in 1960. But this is what happened. They gave that option to the part that was called the British Cameroon. And in the British Cameroon, Britain divided that part into 2. The Northern British Cameroon and the Southern British Cameroon. The Northern British Cameroon elected to join Nigeria. the southern British Cameroon joined with the French part, La République du Cameroun. So they formed what was called the Federal Republic of Cameroon. But unfortunately, we've had two governments that were not effective, that had been, they had caused more, I don't even know how I can describe them, and all of a sudden, the English-speaking part of the country, they don't only feel as if they are second class, but they're being treated like third-class citizens.
Well,
and that is the conflict that you hear today in Cameroon.
Unfortunately, Charis, I have some bad news for you. There's no democracy in Studio 52. If the producer says you have to go, you have to go.
Okay, there you go.
You are tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll have more of a discussion in a moment, including our social media segments, so please, don't go away.
Youth are not just the next generation of African leaders, they are today's leaders. And this is the time to invest in them, today, not tomorrow. So let's connect, let's engage with each other on issues that will transform our societies. Innovation, leadership, entrepreneurship, things that you're doing to move the continent forward, to make you the greatest generation that Africa has known. It's Upfront every Wednesday, 17:30 UTC, right here on The Voice of America.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. What is your opinion about today's topic? Call us at 202-619-3111. US country code 1. When you call, remember the following. Ask only one question, keep your comment brief, and turn down the volume on your radio or television. Now let's return to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther Gidhu-Ewart, and welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, live from Washington. It's time to bring in my colleague and social media reporter, Ayen Bior. Take it away, Ayen.
Thanks, Shaka. For decades, the African diaspora has enriched the social, economic, and cultural environment in the United States and has provided a crucial stepping stone for aspiring African politicians and activists to forge new directions on the continent. Well, this leads us to our question of the week, which asks, do you think politicians and activists of African descent can influence U.S. policies toward Africa? Well, before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for using our social media platforms to communicate with us. And another reminder that we are tweeting live today. Use the hashtag African Diaspora. If you haven't yet, please follow us at VOA Shaka. Speaking of it, let's go to a tweet from Clement Dlamini from Swaziland, who writes, with the Trump administration, I'm not optimistic. Using strength of USAID to leverage, maybe yes. Those in the diaspora need to lobby intensely. Well, now to our comment of the week from Facebook fan Adaze Iheme in Nigeria. She writes, yes, they can influence U.S. policies toward Africa if they practice politics properly. The way the majority of African leaders practice politics at home for their constituents. Otherwise, Western countries or societies will find their political behavior repulsive and won't take them seriously on the issues. Well, let's go to another comment from Facebook fan Timothy Comrade Zulu from Lusaka, Zambia, who writes, how can they do that when they have lost the Pan-African thought? When you look at the speech that Kwame Nkrumah gave in 1963, most of the things that he said no to are the things that these non-leaders of today have embraced without shame and respect for the people who fought for the African struggle. And now to our last Facebook comment from Vincent Atuma in Nigeria, who writes, the question is, how influential are these crop of politicians? Because one has to be influential to be able to influence others. How powerful are their political voices? Well, that is a great question for the panel. But before we get to them, a reminder that we appreciate all of the audience feedback, so please keep them coming. And if you're a new fan, drop us a line at africatv@voanews.com. Once again, our email address is africatv@voanews.com, where you can post your comment on our Facebook page. Enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa. Interact with our show as it's streaming live. Be sure to visit us online at voaafrica.com, where you can join our YouTube channel. Sign up to VOA TV2 Africa and follow us on Twitter at VOA Shaka. A reminder that the show is streaming live every Wednesday. Go to VOA Straight Talk Africa TV program page on our website, or simply Watch us live on your mobile device. Just download the VOA mobile app. Now let's take a look at what's on tap for next week's program. On the next, Straight Talk Africa, we'll review the 29th African Union Summit that was dominated by discussions on war and conflict, but also talks on investing in the African youth. On the next, Straight Talk Africa. Well, that's all for today's social media segment. Shaka, you and the guest have a lot of social media comments to discuss. Back to you.
Well, thanks again for sharing some social media reaction with us. Thanks, of course, Ian, and you're joining us today, and we are talking about the role of the African diaspora in the United States and beyond. Our distinguished guests are Aditora Kayode and Charles Nana. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I have to say frankly that I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host the two of you on Straight Talk Africa.
Thanks for having us once again.
You're most welcome. You heard, of course, what Ian had to share with us from some of the social media reaction.
Yes.
Your reaction?
Yes.
To that.
The first generations of Africans who came into the country all wanted to get the education, get the experience, go back to their country and implement and maybe form their own kind of democracy, not just a copy and paste thing. But then the countries they come from began to have some laxities and a lot of things were going wrong. And the second generation came and decided to, sit and wait and see what good they can get from the community, and thereby giving on access to having children, we're third generation, fourth generation, and all that. And there's a growing population, either we like it or not. It's a huge population. But the notion that politics is dirty back home made them stay away from politics here.
Conflict?
Yes,
Poverty?
probably,
Lack of opportunities, really?
Yes, and all of this, and they also have in their mind to be somebody in the community, get the right education, empower themselves. But we need to move away from all this. It's important. It's important to get all of these experiences and education, be a better person in society. But then you still need that voice because there is some set of people making policies for the others. You need to also inject your own people into that so that you won't have policies that will working against you as a people. You need to have a voice there. That's where we need everybody to come together. Nigeria, Cameroon, Ghana, South Africa, come together. Let's support our own and get them into the Senate, in the House of Reps, into the legal, every aspect, so that you get comfortable with whatever policies that are being churned out.
Charles, what do you do with these social, economic, political forces that push the Africans, for example, to really cross the Atlantic in circumstances, frankly, that you think probably it's like someone who is mad, really. You can see how many people are dying trying to cross the Atlantic to go to Europe, hoping that they would get greener pastures there. There are forces in Europe, forces in North America that pull, which implies there are forces on the African continent that push.
Wonderful. Before I answer that, I want to go back to the previous question with regards to Pan-Africanism. If you realize most of our leaders who were pushing for Pan-Africanism, one way or the other, met misfortune on the way. They were either killed or eliminated. A lot of African countries, those people who push for Pan-Africanism got eliminated on the way. So For example, you can take Cameroon. You can take people like Sékou Touré. You can take people like, in Cameroon, for example, you had Ernest Wangi.
You had Ahidjo?
But Ahidjo was not a Pan-Africanist president. Ahidjo, actually, the colonial powers put people who wanted independence the least, people who did not fight for independence. The people who fought for independence in Cameroon were Ernest Wangji, UPC, and the rest. And it's that same mindset, it's that same people you have in power. My heart bleeds when I hear two brothers, the east part of Cameroon and the French part of Cameroon, and the English part of Cameroon, talking about separation. What was the aspiration of our parents when Cameroon was being partitioned to the English and the French?
Yes.
Their objective was we will somehow find a way to come together. Yes, we've had two reigns of leaders that have not done the best job, but it's not enough reason for us to separate. Those leaders will pass, and we will bring a new generation of leaders that would decolonize our mindset. Why don't we use our own African culture, our own African languages to determine how Africa is run, not what was imposed to us by some colonial powers? Now, let me go to your question with regards to why the socioeconomic forces. You spend, let's take a typical example. Somebody can spend, I'll use Cameroon because I know Cameroon a little bit better. Someone goes to medical school in Cameroon, comes out of medical school, he's been in school for 12 years. Do you know how much they pay them when they come out of medical school?
No.
Today?
No.
$480. So now, imagine a medical doctor. He spent 12 years studying, he earns $480. And within that $480, he has to find a home, he has to feed his children, he has to transport himself to the hospital. So we need to pay our citizens livable wages so that they don't have to look for greener pastures elsewhere. Number two.
Do those doctors perform their duties professionally, or do they simply pretend?
Well, again, if you don't pay someone livable wages that they can live and feed their families, what do you expect to happen? Is what you see in Cameroon and Nigeria.
He'll pretend to work for you.
They come to the office for 5 minutes and have their own clinic on the side where they see you and spend as much time as long as you pay them. Again, $480. A doctor in the United States makes $480 in less than an hour. But you want to pay an African doctor $480 per month.
And
so we have to...
And what are the salaries of the generals?
The generals in the
soldiers.
I'm sorry, the generals in the military. Of course.
And the politicians.
Let's not even go to the generals. Even those guys who didn't even have first school living certificate, but in the military, they make more money than doctors.
Why?
And that is the problem.
Why? Is it because they are more important to society?
Oh, absolutely
or
not.
to the individual who is in the state house?
Absolutely not. Because the regime and those regimes in Africa, especially French Africa, pay those people so they can keep them in power. So you keep those who carry the guns to keep you in power at the expense of the population. So you have that. Then you also have political unrest. You go to school, you come out of school, there is war. We have to change our mindset, and this is where the diaspora can add value. We work as partners with our brothers back home. We have seen things done a little bit differently. We can see what is good in the Western society. We know what is good in an African culture. Let's bring that and work with our brothers and say, how do we make Africa great? You cannot imagine, one last statement. If you are in Cameroon, you want to mail a letter to Nigeria, which is next door. Do you know how that letter travels?
No.
It leaves Cameroon, goes to France.
What?
Gets from France and then comes back to Nigeria.
Come on, you don't
It's
still
crazy.
have that kind of stuff, do you?
It's crazy, and that is exactly what we are saying. Africa leaders have to understand we have grown up. You have children who have worked and continue to work with some of the best and the brightest. Create conducive environment. Let them come home and contribute their 2 cents in the development of our nations.
Charles,
Yes, sir.
you are a professional,
Yes.
a world-class professional, as a matter of fact.
That's what they say, yes.
Very respectable. Do you ever interact, for example, with Cameroonian senior government officials or exchange some social amenities so you can talk about some of these things, really?
We try.
Then?
We try. I used to, except the last 2 years I haven't been, but I used to travel to Africa 2 times a year. Let me give you a simple example, because one of the government officials once told me, when you talk about us, you're a little bit bitter. I say, yes. Most people in the diaspora are bitter because They bleed for Africa. They bleed for home. And when they make overtures, you guys shut them down. I'll give you a simple example.
There has to be a dialogue, not a monologue, Charles.
Correct. And they don't want to listen because they look at you as a threat. Let me give you a simple example, practical example.
Why would they look at you as a threat?
And that is the most unfortunate thing. They think that you come with different ideas. They call it subversive. Let me tell you something, before I even go to what I wanted to talk about.
Guys drive Mercedes-Benz.
Of course.
The last time I checked, Mercedes-Benz
Let me give you a
is
simple
manufactured
example.
in Germany.
You have some of these Anglophones who are claiming or are crying and begging the government to treat them fairly and manage the resources of the state fairly. When they go to Cameroon, do you know what happens? They are turned back at the airport. So the guy will buy his ticket in the United States, spend $2,000, do whatever. He gets to Africa at the airport, they turn him in that he was an activist in the US of A. That is wrong. We cannot, number one, is wrong policy, and I think some of our leaders are poorly advised. They should look for their children who can give them advice that is in the best interest of the nation, not individual interests.
Very interesting. Adiola, you obviously listened to what he is talking about, Aditola rather. Do you believe him? You have people who are in charge of countries in Africa, and they talk about the need for patriotism. Are the leaders in some of those African countries themselves patriotic? Especially given, for example, that they do not provide adequate service delivery for their people. But when they get sick or their family or their friends, they send them to South Africa, to India, to Europe, to North America. They do not even wish or have their children to study in their universities back home. They have their children studying in the first world.
That's the hypocrisy we find in our environment. You know, we preach, use made in Africa things, go to African schools, go to Nigerian schools, go to the hospitals and the infrastructure. But then if anything happens, the next step, you find people who say, who talk to students who are protesting against the shutdown of their schools. And the leaders have their children back in some school in US, in UK, in Europe, and all other countries that you find it appalling that this kind of people still churn out policies for students, some other people's children. We have some schools closed down for years, for months, and people are bitter. People are bitter about what's happening in their countries, what the leaders are, you know, what they are not doing to make lives better for themselves. But then we also have Africans in diaspora who are willing to do something for their countries. We need to be more receptive. If they have ideas that they want to bring into the country, allow them. Allow
There's a
them.
need for mutual respect.
Thank you.
And
Collaboration.
a dialogue, really.
Yes, and not just one. It shouldn't be a copy and paste thing from on the part of Africans in diaspora, because it's not the same thing. It's not the same terrain. It's not the same atmosphere. You can't just copy and paste. We need to fashion out our own kind of democracy, our own system of governance that can work for each and every segment, each and every country of the country.
From what I just heard, frankly, I see leaders in Africa who do not have confidence, for example, in their health care. So they don't, in fact, have confidence in their doctors, their nurses. That's the reason they have to go overseas to receive treatment. They do not have confidence in their teachers, their professors, their universities and what have you. That's the reason they send their children to abroad and overseas. How can we figure out a way of reaching out to them and tell them to be more patriotic about their countries? Because after all, frankly, they would be nothing if they are not supported by those African countries.
The irony of it is that in these countries, when you go back, when you travel out, you get to see somebody from your country treating you as
Honestly,
the doctor.
exactly.
There was a story about somebody who needed emergency surgery, and they said, no, the doctor is not available, blah, 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 and that. And, you know, they put some money together, tried to fly the person out of the country. Guess what? The same doctor that wasn't available in that country was the one they went to.
As a matter of fact, I once met a prominent Nigerian, sometimes political commentator, I think Pat Utomi.
Pat Utomi, yeah.
He was telling me about going to Britain or going to Johannesburg to be treated by fellow Nigerians.
The
Ugandans will tell you the same thing, Cameroonians will tell you the same thing. Why?
Well, it still boils down to our system. There's so much, people don't trust the system again.
Are there
right
systems?
Now, well, there are systems. We're trying to strengthen those systems. Years back, maybe it's a total breakdown, but there's a lot of efforts on part of the government and, of course, on the citizens to strengthen this system. But how long it will take us is what we don't know. And we need to move fast because the structure of the system itself, the country itself, boils down to the family system. Let's encourage ourselves. Let's empower ourselves. Let's see good in ourselves.
You know, in 2009, I happened to be in the Ghanaian capital, Accra, with then US President Barack Obama, and I remember him addressing Africa and talking about what Africa does not need are strong men or even strong women. He didn't say women because most of them, in fact, are men. But what it needs really are strong institutions.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. But let me go back to your question of no confidence. Let's take a simple example. The issue comes down to the quality of our products. So let's take a doctor or an engineer. Let's take a computer engineer. In our country, in most African countries, the government does not pool resources in education. So if you do not pay the teachers, who do you expect to teach your children? What is the quality of student that you think you are developing? You have an engineer, someone who come out of engineering school with a master's degree, has never seen a computer, but he's a computer engineer.
The most important budget is allocated to
the military, to the defense and military.
Police.
So talking about healthcare, so you see the African leaders, when they are sick or their children are sick, they want to rush to England. The Nigerian president has been in England every week since he was elected president. Meanwhile, we have physicians in Nigeria. So he doesn't trust the people we have there. But more importantly, another important point that you see a lot in French, all over Africa, is the idea of meritocracy. We do not encourage meritocracy in Africa. If you are president, your son, your cousins, your nephews, all of them will be vice president and secretary general. But if they're not good, like whatever you put in is what you get out. We say garbage in, garbage out.
Like Equatorial Guinea.
So
the president is Theodore Obiang.
Yes.
And guess who is vice president?
His son. So if you have that, so how then do you expect that if you are sick, you want to go to the doctor that you did not invest in? Number two, he have not even seen some of the equipment that he needs to use to but where do they keep all of their money? Their money is sent overseas. We need Pan-African leaders who can invest in Africa, build the top hospitals in Africa. There's even an African president who went and built hospitals in Germany. And there are no hospitals in his home country. That is wrong. And we need to change that. And that is our job as a diaspora. Yes, I understand. When we go home, they don't want, most of the time, they look at you as a threat. But we have to find ways in which we relate to them that we are children of this country. We want to add our own 2 cents in the development of our motherland.
These African leaders, some in fact would say are African rulers, do not work in isolation. There is a dynamic, obviously. They work with some elements elsewhere around the world. What about the role of the African diaspora? We live here, for example.
Yes.
There is such a thing as U.S. foreign policy towards Africa.
Yes.
Different type of countries. How can we work in a manner that can actually influence the manner in which the United States government interacts with the African countries? And
that is the reason why those of the diaspora need to begin getting involved. Please, I cannot overemphasize, if there's one thing your audience takes out of this, those in the diaspora, get involved. Run for parent council, city school board, mayor, I am running for United States Senate because if I am on the table, the issues that we have in Africa, leaders who are there for 40, 50 years, we need to change that. The average age of an African is 22 years.
Yeah, but
the average age of our leaders is 80. They have nothing in common.
Charles, there is a saying that when the politicians are running for office,
yes,
they do it in poetry. They promise heaven on earth. But when they actually get elected and they begin the business of governing, they do that in prose.
Well, let me answer that in this way. I don't know about what politicians...
You have 1 minute, by the way.
I don't know what politicians do. I'm a problem solver. That's what I've done for 25 years. When companies are sick or communities are not doing well, they need someone to turn it around. That's when they look for someone like me to come and fix it. I think that our African countries need help, and I'm available, and we can go and help fix them. Now, with regards to what politicians say, I cannot speak on behalf of them, but we need Africans who are problem solvers in the diaspora to join hands with those that are back home to fix the African continent. It's time we grow up from the colonial domination and start taking things and be responsible for our future and say, we go to same schools, we do better than some of them, we should be able to lead our countries in the right direction, as opposed to supporting dictators who have been there and continue to be there for 50 years.
Aditola, how do we bring about an environment, frankly, that persuades some of these African rulers or some of these individuals who have the opportunity to be presiding over the affairs, obviously, of their countries and affecting millions and millions of people to adopt pro-people policies? To adopt policies, frankly, that reflect socio-economic justice for all of us.
I also see that if they refuse to do all these things, the people should question. Africans, we are made to, you know, just accept everything. No, the world has moved away from just accepting any and everything. Question those in authority. Ask them. Put them on their toes and ask them this and this. How did you do this? We need this, we need that. We shouldn't just be receptive and take everything in its strides. No. Begin to ask questions, get involved. Don't just sit back at home and expect that government will do everything for you.
How is it like working as a professional journalist in Nigeria and in Lagos in particular? Because I see the Lagos media, frankly, as being very, very vibrant, especially the print media.
Yes, Lagos is, I see Lagos as the media capital of Nigeria. Every newspaper, broadcast, TV, and also they're represented in Lagos. It's a fair environment as at now, because we operate in democracy. You're allowed to say what you want to say. You're allowed to write what you want to write. But then in colored ways, you know. It depends on what you're saying. It depends on the topic you're addressing. You might step on toes, it's allowed, and you get response. Right now, we get people who respond in government. If you question the government, they respond. I don't know what happens underground, you know. A lot of things happen underground, but it's a fair environment for the press in Nigeria right now.
It is Newswatch of Delegiwa, the late Delegiwa. Is it still going strong?
I
don't hear about
not.
it, really.
No. We have the News, Tell Magazine, and all of those newspapers right now, magazines right now.
Very interesting. On that note, thanks to our distinguished guests, Aditola Kayode, a Nigerian broadcast journalist, and Charles Nana, a management consultant based in the U.S. state of Alabama. Thanks to our affiliate stations, along with our viewers and listeners, we thank you for tuning in. For many of our Voice of America radio affiliates, Learning English is coming up next. And tomorrow morning's Daybreak Africa with James Bate. On behalf of the Voice of America, thanks for tuning into Straight Talk Africa. In the meantime, get better, not better, the African diaspora. And please remember to keep the African hopes alive.